On Mother's Day, an old woman smiled as her successful son entered her small Texas home with flowers and love. But when he asked, "Mom, my wife still sends you $5,000 every month, right?" Her smile froze. That single question would uncover months of betrayal and begin a fight for truth she never expected to face. And how all this happened? Let's start from the beginning. Before continuing, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching this story from, because what I'm about to tell you is still unbelievable. Helen Carter, a 67-year-old widow, lived quietly in a small house at the edge of Dallas, Texas. Her days passed peacefully, watering her lavender plants, attending church, and cooking simple meals in the kitchen that still smelled faintly of her late husband's cologne. Her only son, Michael Carter, had grown into a wealthy businessman, founder of a rising tech firm, owner of a mansion in Park Cities, and the proud husband of a woman who seemed to have everything, Vanessa. That Mother's Day morning, Helen prepared her best apple pie and placed it by the window to cool. When Michael walked in carrying a bright bouquet, her eyes glistened with warmth. "Mom," he said kindly, "Vanessa still sends you $5,000 every month, right? I just want to make sure you're comfortable." Helen froze. $5,000? Her heart thumped against her chest. For the past 8 months, she had been surviving on church food packages and small donations from kind neighbors. She managed a trembling smile. "Son, the church is helping me get by." Michael's smile faded. He turned toward the hallway as Vanessa entered, radiant in a cream silk dress, her perfume filling the room. She placed a delicate hand on Michael's arm and said sweetly, "Oh, Mother, you must have forgotten. I stop by every month with the money." Helen's fingers tightened around the edge of her apron. Her voice was steady but quiet. "If you did bring it, dear, it must have gotten lost somewhere." The air grew tense. Michael looked between them, his aging mother in her apron and his elegant wife in designer heels. "Vanessa, you've been delivering it, right?" he asked gently. Vanessa smiled, her tone smooth. "Of course. Maybe your mother just forgot. You know, old age." The words cut deeper than any knife. Helen's hands trembled slightly, but her gaze stayed calm. "Old age doesn't erase the truth," she whispered. "Okay, guys, what would you do if you were in Helen's place? Would you stay silent or speak out in front of your own son? Tell me in the comments." Michael sighed, placing a hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, I'll check the bank records, okay? I just want you to live comfortably." She nodded faintly, but inside a quiet storm had started to rise. When they left, the house felt painfully silent. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, spilling across the old family photos. Moments of joy frozen in time. Helen sat alone at the table, tracing the rim of her teacup with trembling fingers. $5,000 a month. 8 months, she murmured. $40,000. Gone. Her eyes filled with determination. She reached for her old leather notebook and wrote one line that would change everything. "Find the truth, and don't trust fake tears." Friends, do you think she's right to stay quiet for now? Or should she have confronted Vanessa immediately? Helen closed the notebook and stared at the fading light outside. For the first time in years, the warmth of Mother's Day felt cold. Don't miss the next part, because what Helen discovers at the bank will shake her to the core. The next morning, the Texas sun rose bright over Helen Carter's small white house. She moved slowly through her kitchen, her thoughts tangled in the echoes of yesterday's conversation. The words old age and $5,000 every month still rang in her mind like a broken bell. She couldn't rest. She needed the truth. After finishing her tea, she put on her worn cardigan, picked up her handbag, and took the bus to First Texas Community Bank, the same one where she had kept her modest savings for over 2 decades. Inside, a young teller named Molly smiled politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter. How can I help you today?" Helen leaned on the counter. "My son says he's been sending me money every month. $5,000 for the past 8 months. Could you please check if anything came through?" Molly's fingers danced across the keyboard. After a moment, her expression softened. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There are no incoming transfers from Michael Carter or anyone under that name. The last transaction was a 1.25 interest payment." Back in February, the words hit Helen like a cold wave. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, dear." As she stepped out into the street, the warm Texas wind brushed her gray hair, but her heart felt heavy as stone. No transfers. No letters, no money. For 8 long months, she had been thanking God for every loaf of bread from the church, while her son believed she was living comfortably. She walked home in silence. The ticking of the wall clock filled the house when she entered. It was her late husband's gift, a wedding present from 40 years ago. Each tick seemed to whisper, "The truth is coming." That evening, Helen went to St. Mary's Church, where she taught Bible classes every Sunday. Reverend Cole, a kind man with silver hair and a patient smile, noticed her sitting alone in the last pew. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, "you look troubled today." Helen smiled faintly. "I'm just trying to understand why my son's kindness never reached me." Reverend Cole placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The Lord has a way of revealing truth, Helen, but sometimes he asks us to take the first step. Okay, friends, what do you think? Should Helen let faith handle it or take action herself?" That night, Helen sat at her small desk under the warm glow of her reading lamp. She opened her old brown leather notebook and wrote a single sentence that would set everything in motion. "If they're lying, I'll make them tell the truth, through the law." From that day forward, she began documenting everything, every word, every visit, every promise. Thursday, June 14th, Vanessa stopped by with a cake. Said the money's been sent. No envelope, no proof. Saturday, July 12th. Called, said she was too busy with charity work. Heard restaurant music in the background. She wrote calmly, precisely. Not out of anger, but with the steady discipline of someone who had spent a lifetime balancing numbers and prayers. Weeks passed. Each time Vanessa visited, her elegance grew. Designer dresses, diamond earrings, flawless makeup. Yet every visit came with empty hands. One humid afternoon in August, a sleek white Mercedes rolled into Helen's driveway. Vanessa stepped out, radiant and smiling. "Mother," she said sweetly, "I brought you some lavender. It helps with memory." Helen's eyes narrowed slightly. "My memory's fine, Vanessa. Fine enough to remember you've never brought me that money." For a second, Vanessa's perfect smile faltered before she laughed softly. "Oh, Mother, the bank must be slow again. I'll double-check." As the car disappeared down the street, Helen whispered to herself, "She's lying, and now she knows I know." That evening, she wrote one final note before bed. Vanessa, August 22nd. Nervous, lied, left early. Her handwriting trembled slightly, but her resolve did not. She was done being silent. Don't miss the next part, because what Helen discovers about the bank records will change everything she thought she knew about her own son. Days passed, and Helen Carter's determination grew stronger with every sunrise. The sweet smile she once greeted her daughter-in-law with had turned into calm suspicion. Each polite word Vanessa spoke now sounded like a rehearsed lie. One morning, as Helen watered her garden, she thought about the bank again. If money truly was sent, she murmured, then there must be a record somewhere. She placed her watering can aside, wiped her hands, and decided to visit the bank once more. But this time, not as a customer, as an investigator. Inside the marble-floored branch, she asked for the senior account officer and was directed to a man named Mr. Thompson, who greeted her with a warm smile. "Mrs. Carter, what can I do for you today?" Helen met his eyes steadily. "My son, Michael Carter, believes he's been sending me money each month. $5,000 for 8 months. But I never received it. Can you help me verify if such transfers exist?" Mr. Thompson's fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard. He frowned slightly. "According to our system, no transfers have been deposited into your account, Mrs. Carter." Helen nodded. "Then if someone had opened another account under my name, would that be visible here?" The man hesitated. "Technically, no. But if a duplicate account was created using your information, it could be considered identity misuse." Helen's eyes narrowed. "Identity misuse? Meaning fraud." Mr. Thompson looked uneasy but gave a small nod. "If you suspect that, you should file an inquiry. I can't show you the records, but—" He paused, lowering his voice. "I can tell you this. There is another account registered under your name in a nearby branch." "I'm sorry, I can't say more." Helen's breath caught. "Another account. Under her name." When she stepped out of the bank, the summer wind whipped against her face, carrying the scent of dust and truth. Her suspicion had just turned into certainty. That night, she opened her notebook again. Underlined words filled the new page. "Duplicate account under my name. possibly opened by Vanessa. Okay, viewers, the narrator's voice softened. What would you do if you found out someone had created a fake bank account under your name? Stay calm or go straight to the police. Helen sat in her small kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator blending with the sound of her heart pounding. She wasn't angry. She was focused. The next morning, she called Michael's company, pretending to be handling a personal matter. After several transfers, a woman from accounting answered. Sandra Miller speaking. Hello, dear, Helen said politely. I just need to confirm if the $5,000 monthly transfers my son mentioned were processed. Sandra hesitated, her tone careful. I can't disclose financial information, Mrs. Carter, but yes, I recall recurring transfers in that exact amount. However, she paused. The receiving account doesn't match the number I see under your profile. It's similar, but not identical. Helen's grip on the phone tightened. So it's under my name but not my number? That's correct, Sandra said softly. I'm sorry, it happens sometimes when paperwork is forged. Helen thanked her quietly and hung up. She sat still, staring at the wall clock as its ticking grew louder, sharper. The deception was deeper than she'd imagined. That evening, while the sun melted into the Texas horizon, she whispered to herself, It wasn't the bank. It wasn't a mistake. Someone did this deliberately. Later that week, a sleek silver Lexus pulled into her driveway again. Vanessa stepped out with her usual poise, holding a gift basket tied with gold ribbon. Mother, she began sweetly, I brought you some treats. Oh, and the money's in the car. I'll bring it in later. Helen smiled faintly. You said that last time too, Vanessa. Seems your car swallows a lot of envelopes. For the first time, Vanessa faltered. Her lips tightened before she forced another smile. You mustn't worry about small mix-ups. Helen turned away, pouring 2 glasses of iced tea. Small mix-ups don't last 8 months. Vanessa didn't reply. The silence between them grew heavy, until even the sparrows outside went quiet. Friends, be honest. If you were in Helen's shoes, would you confront your daughter-in-law now, or keep gathering proof? When Vanessa left, Helen sat at the window watching the Lexus disappear into the sunset. Her reflection in the glass looked older but sharper, the look of a woman who had nothing left to lose. That night, she wrote in her notebook, September 10th, confronted Vanessa. She lied again. New Lexus, same story. It's time to find help. Don't miss the next part, because a stranger's unexpected visit will finally expose who's been stealing Helen's money all along. The next morning, Helen Carter sat on her porch sipping warm jasmine tea while the faint hum of cicadas filled the Texas air. She felt both anxious and determined. For weeks she had watched her daughter-in-law, Vanessa, lie with effortless grace, each visit wrapped in perfume and deception. But this time, Helen had a plan. She spent the morning reviewing her notes, every date, every lie, and decided it was time to seek help from someone who could see through numbers as well as she could. She reached for her old landline and dialed Hayes and Partners, Michael's company. After a short hold, a calm voice answered, Hayes and Partners Accounting Division. Bennett speaking. Helen's heart skipped slightly. Mr. Bennett, this is Helen Carter, Michael's mother. Sandra Miller mentioned your name. I need your help to understand something. His tone softened immediately. Of course, Mrs. Carter, please go on. Helen explained the situation slowly. The missing transfers, the duplicate account, and her daughter-in-law's repeated lies. There was silence on the line for a few seconds before Bennett said carefully, Mrs. Carter, I think you should know something. I've been reviewing some irregular transactions under your name. Would you allow me to visit you in person tomorrow? Helen agreed, her pulse quickening. When she hung up, she closed her eyes and whispered, The truth is coming. That night she could barely sleep. She replayed every word Vanessa had ever said. Every time her son had looked at her with quiet trust, never realizing that trust was being traded for greed. Friends, the narrator's voice softened. What would you do if you found out your own family might be using your name to steal? Would you stay calm or break down? The next morning, just as the church bells chimed 10, a black sedan pulled up outside Helen's home. A tall man in a neat gray suit stepped out carrying a worn leather briefcase. Mrs. Carter? He said kindly. I'm Bennett. Thank you for meeting me. Helen invited him inside. The morning sunlight spilled across the living room floor as she poured him a glass of water. There was something honest about his eyes, the kind of calm found in people who'd seen too much of life and still believed in fairness. He set the briefcase on the table and opened it carefully. Inside was a thick folder neatly labeled. "Mrs. Carter," he began, "I reviewed your son's account records and found 8 transfers, each for $5,000, totaling $40,000. Helen leaned forward, heart pounding. "And who received them?" He took a deep breath. "Each payment was deposited into an account under the name Helen Carter. But Mrs. Carter, this account was opened by your daughter-in-law, Vanessa Carter." Helen's breath caught. "She used my name?" "Yes," Bennett said quietly. "She forged your identification. Your son authorized it, likely without realizing the form listed her as the recipient. It's sophisticated but unmistakably fraud." For a long moment, Helen sat still. The sunlight outside seemed to fade, replaced by a hollow quiet. "She's been stealing from my son, using my name," she whispered. Bennett nodded slowly. "And spending it too. Spa treatments, designer clothing, first-class travel, even a new car." Helen closed her eyes, her jaw tightening. Then she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Bennett, for bringing me the truth." He smiled faintly. "Justice begins with proof. I'll gather every document, every record, and when we're ready, we'll expose her properly." Viewers, imagine being in Helen's shoes right now. How would you confront someone so close, knowing the betrayal runs this deep? When Bennett left, Helen stood by the window watching the car disappear down the road. She felt both heavy and strong, like a storm building in quiet skies. That evening, she wrote in her journal, her handwriting neat but fierce. September 11th, Bennett confirmed 8 transfers. Vanessa forged my identity. $40,000 stolen. Justice begins. As the red Texas sunset washed across her garden, she whispered softly to herself, "Vanessa, you chose the wrong woman to fool. Don't miss the next part. Because Helen's plan to expose Vanessa will begin, and this time, the trap will close right in her own living room." The next morning, Helen Carter woke with a strange calmness. The sun had barely risen, yet her heart was no longer heavy. The truth was finally in her hands, and now she had to decide what to do with it. She sat at her dining table, her notebook open beside a steaming cup of tea. Every word she'd written, every lie, every visit, every missing dollar, stared back at her like a quiet army of evidence. On the first page, she wrote in bold letters, "The truth must come out, and but carefully." Helen wasn't a woman who believed in revenge, but she did believe in accountability. Later that morning, she called Mr. Bennett again. "I want to confront her," she said firmly, "but I want you there, quietly, as my witness." Bennett agreed. "I'll be there tomorrow, Mrs. Carter. Stay calm and act as you normally do." Let her speak. That night, Helen barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see Vanessa's perfect smile. The one she now realized had been masking something dark all along. "Okay, friends." The narrator's voice softened. "If you discovered someone close to you had stolen from you and lied about it for months, what would you do? Stay quiet or plan their downfall?" The next afternoon, Helen baked her famous apple pie, the same one her son had loved since childhood. The sweet smell filled the air, blending innocence with irony. At exactly 3 o'clock, Vanessa's white Lexus rolled up the driveway. She stepped out gracefully, sunglasses perched on her head and a soft smile curling her lips. "Mother," she said sweetly, "you look radiant today." "Oh, is that your apple pie again?" Helen smiled politely. "Yes, dear, come in. I was just thinking about you." Vanessa stepped inside, setting her designer purse on the table. "I hope everything's been fine with your finances lately," she said casually. "Michael told me you were checking on your bank again." Helen placed 2 cups of tea on the table and looked straight into her eyes. "Yes," she replied softly. "And guess what, Vanessa? I found something very interesting." For a split second, Vanessa froze. Then her expression melted back into calm. "Oh, what did you find?" Helen smiled faintly. "Another account, under my name, but opened by someone else." The silence was suffocating. Vanessa's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her cup. "That sounds strange. Maybe the bank made a mistake." Before Helen could respond, there was a knock at the door. She stood up calmly. "That must be Mr. Bennett. I invited him to join us." Vanessa's face drained of color. Bennett? She echoed. Yes, Helen said, her tone steady. The company accountant. He found something interesting, too. The door opened and Bennett entered holding his briefcase. His polite smile did nothing to ease the tension in the room. Mrs. Carter, Ms. Vanessa, he greeted. Thank you for meeting with me. Vanessa swallowed hard, her eyes darting between them. What's this about? Bennett opened the briefcase and placed a stack of printed statements on the table. These are the records of 8 transfers totaling $40,000, deposited into an account under the name Helen Carter. That account was opened and verified using your identification, Mrs. Vanessa Carter. Her breath caught. That's ridiculous. I didn't. Helen raised a hand. Please, don't lie in my house again. Vanessa's voice cracked. I only did it for Michael. He works so hard and he doesn't give me enough freedom. Helen's gaze didn't waver. You stole from both of us. And you lied to his face. Okay, viewers, if you were Helen right now, would you forgive her or let the law handle it? Be honest. Tears filled Vanessa's eyes, but Helen's heart didn't soften this time. You will return every cent, she said quietly. And when you do, you'll tell my son the truth, yourself. Vanessa stood frozen, speechless, her carefully built facade crumbling before them. Bennett closed his briefcase. Mrs. Carter, I'll make sure the repayment process is documented properly. This won't disappear. Helen nodded slowly, watching Vanessa's expression twist between fear and guilt. When Vanessa finally left, the silence in the house felt heavier than ever. Helen sat by the window, looking at the golden evening sky. She whispered softly to herself, The storm's not over yet, but at least I'm no longer blind. Don't miss the next part, because when Michael learns the truth, his reaction will break Helen's heart in a way she never expected. The following evening, Helen Carter sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The house was quiet, too quiet. The confrontation with Vanessa replayed in her mind like a storm she couldn't turn off. The lies, the trembling hands, the excuses. She had waited for this moment for months, yet something inside her still ached. Justice had begun, but peace hadn't arrived. She turned to look at her phone lying on the table. There were no new messages. Her son Michael hadn't called in 2 days. Helen knew why. Vanessa must have already told him her version of what happened. She sighed deeply. He's my son. He'll believe her first. That night she made herself a simple dinner but barely ate. The silence was heavy enough to make the ticking clock sound like thunder. Just as she was about to stand, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, her heart dropped. Michael stood there, shoulders tense, eyes sharp. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept. Mom, he said flatly, we need to talk. Helen stepped aside quietly. Of course, come in. Michael walked in, his footsteps heavy. He didn't even glance at the familiar pictures on the wall, the ones showing his childhood, his wedding, and his father's proud smile. Vanessa told me everything, he said. She said you accused her of stealing, of forging documents, of taking money from me. Mom, how could you say that? Helen's hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed calm. Because it's true, Michael. She used my name to open another bank account. The accountant from your office confirmed it. Michael frowned. You mean Bennett? Vanessa said he's mistaken, that there's been a banking error. She's devastated that you think she'd do something like that. Devastated? Helen's eyes narrowed. She's a professional liar. I have proof. I have every date, every visit, every missing dollar written down. Michael's voice rose. Mom, you don't understand. Vanessa's been under stress. Maybe she handled things differently, but she wouldn't steal from you. Helen stood still, staring at her son. For a moment, she saw the little boy who used to hold her hand while crossing the road. But that boy was long gone, replaced by a man blinded by love and pride. Michael, she said softly, you've always been kind-hearted, but sometimes love makes people ignore the truth that's standing right in front of them. Okay, friends. The narrator's voice turned gentle. What would you do if your child refused to believe you, even with all the proof in your hands? Stay quiet or fight to be heard. Michael rubbed his forehead. Mom, please, don't make this worse. Vanessa loves you. Helen smiled sadly. If this is love, then I'd rather have her hate me in honesty than love me through lies. Michael's jaw clenched. I can't do this right now. He turned and walked out before she could say another word. The door closed behind him with a quiet thud, but to Helen it sounded like the door to her heart being locked from the outside. She sank into her chair, tears pooling in her eyes. "He doesn't believe me," she whispered. "After everything I did for him, he doesn't believe me." The next morning, Helen received a call from Bennett. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I finalized the paperwork. Vanessa has been officially reported for financial fraud. The investigation will proceed soon." Helen stayed silent for a moment. "Will my son know?" "Yes," Bennett replied softly. "He'll find out through the legal notice," Helen nodded. "Then the truth will speak for me when I can't." That evening, as she wrote in her notebook, her words trembled across the page. "He doesn't believe me yet, but one day, he will." She closed the book, staring out the window as dusk settled like a veil. Her reflection looked older than yesterday, but her eyes still carried the fire of someone who refused to give up. Take a second to like and subscribe and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this. The narrator added warmly. Don't miss the next part, because when the police arrive at Michael's house, what happens next will change everything between mother and son forever. The morning was quiet in the upscale neighborhood of Park Cities, where Michael and Vanessa lived in their glass-walled mansion. But that peace shattered when a black and white police car pulled into their driveway. Vanessa froze in the living room, her coffee cup slipping slightly in her trembling hand. Michael came downstairs, half-dressed for work, confusion clouding his face. "What's going on?" he asked sharply. Before Vanessa could answer, two officers stepped inside with serious expressions. "Mrs. Vanessa Carter," one of them said. She swallowed hard. "Yes? You're under investigation for financial fraud and identity misuse. We have a warrant to question you regarding a forged account under the name Helen Carter." Michael's jaw dropped. "What? There must be some mistake." But when the officer unfolded the file and laid out the printed evidence, including bank records, signatures, and identification copies, Michael felt the blood drain from his face. The signature looked exactly like his mother's handwriting. The account number was almost identical to hers. The documents were stamped, dated, and verified, all linked to Vanessa's ID. "Vanessa," he whispered, voice breaking. "What did you do?" I don't know," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "They said it was a business account for your mom. I thought it was just for her pension." The officer interrupted, his voice firm. "Mrs. Carter, you'll need to come with us for questioning." Michael followed them outside as Vanessa was led into the car, flashing lights reflecting off her tearful eyes. Neighbors peeked from their windows as whispers began to ripple through the street. When the police car disappeared around the corner, Michael stood frozen on the driveway, holding his head in his hands. His world, the perfect image he'd built, was crumbling. "Friends," the narrator said softly, "what would you do if you found out the person you loved most had betrayed both you and your family? Forgive them or let justice take its course." That evening, Michael drove straight to his mother's house. Helen was sitting quietly in her armchair, knitting as the radio played an old tune in the background. When she saw her son's car stop outside, she slowly stood up, her heart tightening with worry. Michael stepped inside, eyes red, voice low. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Helen's eyes softened instantly. "You saw?" He nodded. "They took her away this morning. The police showed me everything. The bank forms, the signatures. I should have believed you, Mom. I was blind." Helen placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You wanted to believe the best in the woman you love. That's not blindness, son, that's love. But sometimes love needs truth to survive." Michael's voice trembled. "She forged everything, even your signature." "I can't believe she—" His voice broke completely. Helen pulled him into a hug, her frail hands patting his back. "You're my son, and no matter how many storms come, I'll always stand by you. But she needs to face the consequences." Michael nodded, tears falling freely now. "I just don't know what to do next." Helen smiled faintly. "Start by standing for what's right even when it hurts." They sat together in silence for a long while, the air filled with a mix of grief and relief. That night, Helen wrote again in her notebook, her words neat but heavy. "Truth hurts, but lies destroy. Today the truth finally spoke." She placed the notebook beside her and whispered softly, "Maybe now peace will find its way back home." But as she turned off the lamp, her phone buzzed on the table. A message appeared from an unknown number. "You think it's over, Helen? It's just beginning." Helen's eyes widened, the faint glow of the screen lighting her face. Okay, viewers, what do you think? Is Vanessa behind this message, or is someone else trying to protect her? She looked toward the window, where a shadow flickered briefly against the streetlight outside. Take a second to like and subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this one, the narrator said calmly, as the tension rose once again. Don't miss the next part, because the mystery behind that message will lead Helen to uncover a truth far more dangerous than she imagined. The next morning, Helen Carter sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone. That single text message from the unknown number had replayed in her mind all night. You think it's over, Helen? It's just beginning. Her first thought was Vanessa, but something felt different. The message didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like a threat. She tried to calm herself with tea, but her hands trembled as she held the cup. The aroma of jasmine no longer brought her peace. Instead, it reminded her that peace could be fragile and easily stolen. After breakfast, Helen decided to visit Mr. Bennett again. When she arrived at his office, he stood to greet her, concern already in his eyes. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "you look pale. Is everything all right?" Helen handed him the phone. "Someone sent me this message last night. I thought Vanessa was behind it, but something doesn't feel right." Bennett frowned, reading the words carefully. "That's unsettling. Have you shown this to the police?" She shook her head. "Not yet. I don't want to cause trouble unless I'm sure." Bennett sighed. "I understand. But be careful, Mrs. Carter. Fraud cases sometimes uncover more than money. They uncover people who'd rather stay hidden." Helen's eyes met his. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said slowly, "that Vanessa might not have acted alone." Helen's breath caught. The idea hadn't even crossed her mind. As she drove home, her thoughts churned. If Vanessa wasn't alone, who else could be behind this? When she arrived, she found a small brown envelope tucked under her front door. No name, no address, just her initials, HC, written in shaky handwriting. She opened it carefully, and her heart skipped a beat. Inside were photocopies of bank transfer slips, the same $5,000 transactions Michael had made. But this time, a new name appeared beneath the forged account signature. "Martin Lewis. Who's Martin Lewis?" she whispered, her pulse quickening. The doorbell rang suddenly. Helen froze. Through the window, she saw a delivery man holding a bouquet of flowers. She opened the door cautiously. "These are for you, ma'am," he said. No sender's name, just a card. Helen took the flowers and opened the small white card. It read, "Stay out of this or the next message won't be a warning." Her hands went cold. "Okay, friends." The narrator's voice deepened slightly. "What would you do if you got a message like that? Would you go to the police, or try to find out who's behind it yourself?" Helen locked the door and called Bennett immediately. "Someone knows I'm digging deeper," she said. "They sent flowers and then a threat." Bennett's voice was calm but tense. "Don't panic. I'll call Detective Harris, the one handling Vanessa's case. He'll increase surveillance near your home." That night, Helen sat in her armchair, the flowers still lying untouched on the counter. Her cat brushed against her leg, but even that small comfort couldn't quiet the fear crawling up her spine. Outside, the wind howled through the street, rattling the windows. She could swear she saw a figure watching from across the road, tall, still, and silent. When she blinked, it was gone. She turned on every light in the house and whispered to herself, "They can scare me, but they can't silence me." She picked up her pen and wrote in her notebook, October 4th, received threat. New name, Martin Lewis. Must find out connection to Vanessa. Then she looked directly into the camera in her mind, as if speaking to her viewers through the story. "Friends, sometimes evil hides behind familiar faces, but I won't stop until I know the truth." The next morning, a police car arrived quietly outside her home. Detective Harris stepped out, his tone serious. "Mrs. Carter, we traced the number that sent you the message." Helen's heartbeat quickened. "And?" Harris looked straight at her. "It wasn't Vanessa's phone. It came from inside your son's company." Helen's breath caught. "From Michael's office?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, from someone who knows your son very well. Don't miss the next part, Anne, because the shocking truth about who's behind the messages will leave Helen questioning everything she thought she knew about her own family. Helen Carter's heart pounded as Detective Harris's words echoed through the room. The threatening message came from inside your son's company. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her thoughts tangled between disbelief and fear. My son's company? She repeated slowly. Are you certain? Harris nodded. We traced the IP address. The phone used a company network, registered under an employee named Martin Lewis. Does that name sound familiar? Helen's eyes widened. Martin Lewis. That's the name on the fake bank slips I found in the envelope yesterday. The detective's brow furrowed. Then he's not just an employee. He's part of the fraud. Helen sat back, her trembling hands gripping the edge of the table. Why would someone from Michael's company threaten me? What do they gain? Harris closed his notebook. We believe Martin may have helped Vanessa forge your identity, maybe even manage the transfers behind the scenes. It's likely he profited from it, Helen whispered. So it wasn't just greed, it was partnership. He nodded. Exactly. And he's trying to scare you into staying silent. Okay, viewers. The narrator's voice broke through the tension. What would you do if you found out the person threatening you worked with your own family? Would you confront them or stay quiet and let the police handle it? After the detective left, Helen sat alone in her living room. The ticking clock filled the silence again, marking every passing second of her unease. That evening, she called Michael. He answered with a tired voice. Mom, can we please not talk about this right now? Everything's a mess already. Helen's tone was gentle but firm. Michael, someone from your company is involved. A man named Martin Lewis. There was a pause. Martin? Michael repeated, sounding surprised. He's my finance manager. He's been with me since the beginning. Mom, that can't be right. Helen's voice steadied. It is right. The police traced the message back to your company's network. The same man helped Vanessa move the money. Michael sighed deeply. I'll talk to him tomorrow. But please stay home, okay? Let me handle this. Helen wanted to believe him, but part of her knew this was bigger than just a misunderstanding. The next day, she went about her chores as usual. She cleaned the porch, fed her cat, and tried to keep busy. But every noise outside made her heart jump. Around noon, a black car slowed down near her house. The window rolled down just enough for her to see a man's hand and holding a phone. He snapped a photo of her porch, then drove away. Helen rushed inside and locked the door. She called Detective Harris immediately. Someone was here. They took a picture of my house. Harris's voice was urgent. Stay inside, Mrs. Carter. We're sending an officer to patrol your street. When the call ended, Helen sat in her chair, clutching her phone tightly. They're watching me, she whispered. That night, rain poured outside as thunder rolled through the Texas sky. The streetlight flickered through her curtains, painting shifting shadows across the walls. Helen couldn't sleep. She sat awake, notebook open, pen trembling in her hand. October 6th. Martin Lewis confirmed as suspect. Threats continue. I will not back down. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. Another message. You should have listened, Helen. The truth will hurt your son more than it hurts you. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just intimidation, it was personal. The next morning, Michael called her in a panic. Mom, Martin's gone. He cleared his desk and disappeared last night. Helen's breath caught. Gone? Yes, Michael said shakily. And his last text to one of my employees said, Tell Helen I warned her. Helen's voice turned to a whisper. He's not just running, he's planning something. Friends, the narrator asked softly, if you were in Helen's place, would you stay where you are or disappear until it's safe? As Michael's voice broke through the line again, Helen looked toward the window. A car idled quietly at the end of her street. Engine running. Headlights dim, she whispered to herself. They're still watching. Take a second to like and subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this one, the narrator said, as the tension thickened in the night. Don't miss the next part, because when Helen decides to face Martin herself, she'll uncover a connection that will shatter her trust forever. The night after Martin disappeared, Helen Carter barely slept. Every sound outside made her heart skip. The wind rattled her windows, but what frightened her most was the silence between the gusts. The silence that made her wonder if someone was standing just beyond the porch light. When the first rays of dawn touched her curtains, she sat up, weary but determined. Enough hiding, she whispered. I've lived my whole life with honesty. I won't start fearing liars now. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window watching the empty street. But as she glanced at her reflection, her phone buzzed again. Another message. Meet me at the Old Maple Diner at 2 p.m. if you really want the truth. Come alone. The sender. Unknown number. Helen's fingers trembled slightly as she read it. She knew it was dangerous, but she also knew she couldn't ignore it. She dialed Detective Harris immediately. Helen, don't go, he warned firmly. It's a setup. We'll handle it. But Helen shook her head even though he couldn't see her. Detective, I've been lied to for months. If I don't face this myself, I'll never be free. After hanging up, she packed her notebook, slipped on her coat, and whispered to herself, this ends today. By 2 p.m., the Old Maple Diner looked nearly deserted. The sky was gray and the smell of rain hung in the air. Helen entered cautiously. Only 2 people were there. A waitress cleaning tables and a man sitting in the far corner with a cap pulled low over his eyes. When he looked up, Helen's heart froze. Martin Lewis. He smiled faintly, his face pale and unshaven. You're brave, Mrs. Carter. Not many would come. Helen kept her distance. You've caused me enough pain. What do you want? Martin leaned back, sighing. You think Vanessa acted alone? She didn't. She was desperate, but I was the one who helped her. Your son's company had money moving through so many channels. No one would have noticed if I slipped a few transactions under another name. Helen's eyes narrowed. Why threaten me then? Why send those messages? Because you got too close, Martin said quietly. Vanessa thought you'd give up after your son stopped believing you. But you didn't. You kept digging. You forced us to cover our tracks, he rubbed his temple. I never meant for this to go that far. But Vanessa, she changed. She was planning to transfer everything, even your son's savings, before she got caught. Helen felt her knees weaken, but she stayed firm. And now she's in jail. And you're running. Martin chuckled bitterly. Running doesn't help when guilt follows you everywhere. Then turn yourself in, Helen said. Do something right for once. He looked down at his hands. I will. But there's something you need to know before I do. Helen frowned. What? Martin's voice dropped. Michael signed the authorization papers that allowed Vanessa access to your identity. Her heart stopped. What? He didn't know what it was, I swear, Martin said quickly. Vanessa tricked him, told him it was a tax exemption form for you. But his signature made the forgery possible. Helen felt the air leave her lungs. All this time, the betrayal she'd felt from her daughter-in-law was unknowingly enabled by her own son. Okay, viewers. The narrator's voice trembled softly. What would you do if you found out your own child had unknowingly helped in your pain? Would you forgive or would you break? Helen's eyes filled with tears. He didn't mean to, she whispered. He can't have known. Martin stood. That's all I had to say. I'm done hiding. He slid a small flash drive across the table. Everything you need, and the files, the transfers, the messages. It's all there. Give it to the police. As he walked out, rain began to fall, heavy and relentless, drumming against the diner's windows. Helen stared at the flash drive lying on the table, realizing this tiny object carried the power to end the nightmare and/or break her son's heart forever. Take a second to like and subscribe and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this. On, the narrator said softly. Helen closed her eyes, whispering, I wanted the truth, but I never imagined it would hurt this much. Don't miss the next part, because when Helen gives the evidence to the police, the investigation will take a shocking turn that changes everything. The rain poured endlessly that night as Helen Carter sat in her living room, the flash drive lying untouched on the table before her. Every drop that struck the window seemed to echo her racing thoughts. Michael's signature, his handwriting, his unknowing part in her pain. She wanted to believe what Martin said wasn't true, that it was another manipulation, but deep down, her heart whispered otherwise. Michael had trusted Vanessa too blindly. Still, he was her son. And love, even wounded love, doesn't disappear that easily. Helen picked up the phone and called Detective Harris. I have new evidence, she said quietly, but I want to hand it over in person. He agreed to meet her at the station in the morning. That night, Helen didn't sleep. Instead, she reread her old notebook, the one filled with every date, every lie, every piece of pain turned into purpose. The last line she had written read, The truth can heal or it can destroy. I'll find out which tomorrow. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and glistening under the Texas sun. Helen wrapped the flash drive in a small cloth and tucked it into her handbag. As she locked her door, she whispered, "Let this be the last step." At the police station, Detective Harris greeted her warmly. "Mrs. Carter, it's good to see you again. You've been through a lot." Helen handed him the flash drive. "This contains everything Martin Lewis confessed. Transactions, messages, and fake signatures." Harris nodded, connecting the drive to his laptop. His brows furrowed as he scrolled through the data. "This is more extensive than we thought. There are transfers under multiple names. Not just yours." Helen leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Vanessa and Martin were part of a wider operation," he said. "They laundered money through at least 6 accounts connected to other clients. Your case just exposed the pattern." Helen's eyes widened. "So my son's company?" "Unknowingly became one of the channels," Harris finished grimly. "Michael's documents gave them access to corporate-level transfers. Your son may have been careless, but not criminal." Helen exhaled a shaky breath. "Thank God." Harris smiled faintly. "Mrs. Carter, you've done something remarkable. You didn't just clear your name. You uncovered a major fraud network. The department will move quickly now." Helen's shoulders relaxed for the first time in months. "I just wanted the truth," she whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." As she stood to leave, Harris stopped her. "We'll protect you. Martin's in custody now, and Vanessa will face new charges based on this evidence. But there's something else you should know." Helen frowned. "What is it?" "Vanessa's lawyer filed a motion claiming emotional manipulation, that she was coerced by someone else. We're investigating who." Helen's eyes darkened. She's still trying to twist her way out of this. "Okay, friends." The narrator's voice rose softly. "What would you do if the person who hurt you refused to take responsibility, even after being caught? Would you forgive or fight until justice is complete?" Helen left the station quietly, the sun warm on her face. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She had faced lies, betrayal, and fear, and still stood tall. When she arrived home, she found Michael waiting on her porch, holding 2 cups of coffee. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. "Mom," he said softly, "I know everything now. Detective Harris called me. I saw the files. You were right about everything." Helen looked at him, her heart softening. "You don't owe me an apology, Michael. You owe yourself forgiveness." He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. "I can't believe I helped her without knowing. I feel like such a fool." Helen took his hand gently. "You trusted love, son. That's never foolish. But now you must learn the difference between love and manipulation." They sat together on the porch, sipping coffee as the golden light fell across the garden. The peace was fragile, but it was real. Take a second to like and subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this one, the narrator said softly, as the camera of the mind lingered on their quiet reconciliation. But just as the calm returned, Helen's phone rang. The caller ID read, "Unknown number." She hesitated, then answered. A cold voice whispered, "Mrs. Carter, you've made powerful enemies." Her hand froze. "Who is this?" The line went dead. Helen stared at the phone, her heart pounding again. Don't miss the next part, because the mysterious caller will reveal a secret that ties back to Helen's past, and it's darker than anything she's faced so far. Helen Carter stared at the phone in her trembling hand long after the line went dead. The voice, deep, deliberate, cold anguish still echoed in her mind. "You've made powerful enemies." Her heart raced. Who could it be? Vanessa was in custody. Martin was arrested. So who else was still out there? She looked around her quiet house. The soft ticking of the wall clock suddenly felt too loud. Her once safe home now felt like a fragile shell surrounded by shadows. Helen walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The street was empty, except for a dark car parked across the road. Its engine wasn't running, but something about it made her uneasy. She called Detective Harris immediately. "Detective, someone just called me. They said I've made powerful enemies." Harris's tone sharpened. "Did you recognize the voice?" "No," Helen said quietly. It didn't sound like Martin or Vanessa. It was someone older, calm, like they were in control. Harris exhaled. "Mrs. Carter, I'll send a unit to check your neighborhood. Keep your doors locked." After hanging up, Helen sat down and tried to steady her breathing. Her hands clutched her rosary. a habit she hadn't turned to in years. Lord, I've faced lies and betrayal, but what else am I meant to endure? Hours passed. As evening fell, the car across the street was gone. For a moment, Helen almost convinced herself she'd imagined everything, until the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, a brown envelope lay on her porch. No name, no address. Just a wax seal with an unfamiliar insignia. The letters ML crossed by a single line. Helen carried it to her table and opened it carefully. Inside were old photographs, black and white, of her late husband, Robert Carter, standing beside a man she didn't recognize. On the back of one photo, a note read, "He started it." "You just finished it." Helen's breath caught. What does this mean? She shuffled through the pictures, each showing her husband at business meetings, signing papers, shaking hands. But one detail stood out. The stranger beside him was wearing the same ring she'd seen in one of Martin's photos, a family crest. Her mind spun. No, that can't be. She called Detective Harris again. "Detective, the man in these photos, I think he's connected to Martin. Send me pictures," Harris replied. Minutes later, his call came back. "Mrs. Carter, you were right. The man with your husband was Leonard Lewis, Martin's father. He was investigated for embezzlement in the late 90s, but the charges were dropped." Helen froze. So Martin's not just a fraudster. He's finishing what his father started. "That's exactly what it looks like," Harris said. "And the voice on the phone? Could have been Leonard himself." "Okay, friends," the narrator's voice came through softly. "What would you do if you found out the people threatening you had ties to your own past, through the one person you loved most? Would you run from the truth or face it head on?" Helen looked at the photos again, her husband smiling, oblivious to the secrets that would one day haunt his wife. She whispered, "Robert, what were you part of?" That night she couldn't sleep. The photographs lay spread across the table, their edges curled like old wounds reopening. Her lamp flickered softly as she wrote in her notebook, "Leonard Lewis and Martin's father, Robert's old partner. Their past built this present." Just after midnight, her phone vibrated again. A message appeared. "We warned you, Helen. Stay away from the past or join him." Her eyes widened. "Join him?" She turned toward the hallway and froze. Her front door was slightly open. "Take a second to like and subscribe and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this one," the narrator said calmly, as the room seemed to tighten with suspense. Helen grabbed her phone, her heart hammering. "Detective Harris," she whispered into the line. "Someone's been inside my house." Don't miss the next part, because when Helen learns who entered her home, the revelation will uncover a hidden betrayal even closer than she imagined. The night air was heavy with fear as Helen Carter stood frozen in her hallway, staring at the front door that now hung slightly open. Her trembling hand gripped the phone tightly as she whispered, "Detective Harris, someone's here." "Stay on the line, Mrs. Carter," Harris said firmly. "Officers are on their way. Don't move." Helen's eyes darted toward the dark living room. The faint creak of a floorboard made her heart skip. She turned off the lamp beside her, letting her eyes adjust to the shadows. The only light came from the street outside, casting a faint glow across the floor. For a moment the house was silent, until she heard it again. A soft click, the sound of a door closing deeper inside. She pressed her back against the wall, whispering, "Please, God, not again." The front porch light flickered, and then she saw it, a shadow passing by her kitchen doorway. Tall, still, watching. "Who's there?" She called out, trying to sound braver than she felt. No answer. The sound of sirens began to echo faintly in the distance, growing louder. Then, footsteps, running. The back door slammed shut. Moments later, 2 police officers burst through the front, flashlights sweeping the house. "Mrs. Carter, are you all right?" one shouted. Helen nodded shakily. They were here. They just left through the back. The officers searched every room. The back door was wide open, a muddy footprint leading onto the porch. Detective Harris arrived minutes later, his expression grim. "You did the right thing calling us. Whoever this was, they're getting desperate." Helen's voice quivered. "They left a message before breaking in." She handed him her phone, showing the text. "We warned you, Helen, stay away from the past or join him." Harris frowned deeply. "We found something in your backyard," one of the officers said, stepping forward. "You'll want to see this." Helen followed them outside. Her heart dropped. There, hanging from the garden fence, was a single photograph, laminated and clipped to the wire. It showed Robert Carter, her late husband, standing beside Leonard Lewis, shaking hands. And behind them was a younger Martin, barely 20, but the message scribbled in red ink across the bottom chilled her to the core. He chose us before he chose you. Helen's knees went weak. No, that's not true. Harris caught her arm. Mrs. Carter, come inside. We'll handle this. Back in the living room, Helen sat in silence, staring at the photo in her trembling hands. Her mind spun through memories she thought were pure. Robert working late, receiving strange calls, whispering in the garage. Could it be? Could the man she loved have been involved with the Lewis family all those years ago? Okay, friends. The narrator's voice lowered softly. What would you do if you discovered the love of your life might have been part of the same corruption you've been fighting? Would you keep searching for truth, or let the past stay buried? Detective Harris spoke gently. Helen, we think this goes beyond the fraud case. Leonard Lewis was Robert's business partner. They started a private investment group in 1998. When Leonard's company went under, Robert sold his shares quietly. But there were missing funds. The same patterns we're seeing now. Helen's voice cracked. You mean, this started with them? Yes, Harris said quietly. Vanessa and Martin were continuing what their fathers began. Tears welled in Helen's eyes. Robert would never have done this willingly. Maybe not, Harris replied. But someone's determined to make you believe he did. She stared at the photo again, whispering, they're using my husband's memory to destroy me. Later that night, after the police left, Helen sat alone in her dimly lit kitchen. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Her cat curled up at her feet as if sensing her pain. She took out her notebook and wrote, Leonard Lewis and Robert Carter, the beginning. Vanessa and Martin, the continuation. It ends with me. Then she closed the book and whispered to herself, tomorrow I face them. All of them. Take a second to like and subscribe and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this one, the narrator said gently, as the tension built to its peak. Don't miss the next part, because in the final confrontation, Helen will uncover the last secret her husband left behind, and the truth will change everything. The next morning, the Texas sky was gray, calm but heavy, as if holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Helen Carter woke early. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her mind was sharper than ever. She knew today would end it, one way or another. On her table lay the photograph of her husband Robert with Leonard Lewis, still marked by the haunting words, he chose us before he chose you. She whispered, if this is the truth, Robert, I need to hear it from your past, not their lies. After breakfast, Detective Harris called. Mrs. Carter, we located Leonard Lewis. He's agreed to meet you under police supervision. Helen's heart skipped. I'll come, she said without hesitation. By noon, she arrived at the county courthouse where Leonard was being held for questioning. He looked older than his son, pale, fragile, but with eyes that still burned with cunning. When Helen entered the room, he smirked faintly. Helen Carter, the woman who ruined my family. Helen's voice was calm. Your family ruined themselves, Leonard, and my husband's name won't be your weapon anymore. Leonard leaned back in his chair. You really think Robert was innocent? You think he didn't know where that money went all those years ago? Helen's throat tightened. You're lying, Leonard chuckled. He and I started that fund together. He wanted out when things got risky, but his name stayed on the papers. When the fraud was exposed, he begged me to cover it up to protect his company. I did, and now, you're paying the price for his secret. Helen's hands trembled, but her gaze stayed steady. You're twisting the truth like your son and Vanessa did. Leonard's tone softened, almost pitying. You can tell yourself that if it helps you sleep. Okay, friends, the narrator's voice whispered. What would you do if you found out the person you loved might have hidden a truth that destroyed your peace? Would you forgive them, or accept the pain to keep their memory pure? Detective Harris spoke up. Leonard, enough. We've got your confession. Your family's crimes are exposed, Leonard sneered. Confession? I'm just telling her what she refused to believe. Robert wasn't a saint. Helen took a deep breath. No one is, but he built his life on love, not greed. You built yours on destruction. That's why your legacy ends here. Her calmness silenced the room. Moments later, officers led Leonard away, but as he passed her, he leaned in close and whispered, "There's one file Robert hid from you, in the old safety box at Glenview Bank. You'll find it under his name. Read it, if you dare." Helen froze. "What file?" But Leonard only smiled as the door closed behind him. That afternoon, Helen and Detective Harris drove straight to Glenview Bank. After verifying the old records, the manager returned with a small, dust-covered metal box labeled Robert Carter, private. Helen's hand shook as she opened it. Inside was a single letter yellowed by time. She unfolded it carefully. "My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, it means the past has finally caught up to us. Leonard's greed destroyed everything we built, and I fear the choices I made to protect you might someday hurt you. I signed those papers, and not out of betrayal but fear. Fear of losing everything, including you. Forgive me. Your Robert." Tears blurred her vision. "He tried to save me," she whispered. "He wasn't perfect, but he tried." Detective Harris spoke gently. "He didn't betray you, Mrs. Carter. He tried to shield you from a world darker than you knew." Helen smiled weakly through her tears. "Then I've finally heard the truth." She walked out of the bank into the warm sunlight, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The storm was finally over. That evening, Helen sat on her porch with her cat in her lap, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and orange. She whispered softly, "Robert, I forgive you, and I forgive myself for taking this long to understand." Turning to the viewers, the narrator's voice grew tender. "Friends, sometimes truth doesn't heal. It humbles us. It reminds us that love and pain can exist side by side, and forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It sets us free." She closed her notebook one final time. On the last page, the final line read, "Justice served. Truth found. Peace earned." Take a second to like and subscribe and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this one, the narrator said warmly. As the camera of imagination pulled away, Helen smiled softly at the setting sun, no longer a victim, but a survivor who had reclaimed her story. Please comment below and add, where are you watching from? Maybe each of us has been at same point, when kindness is tested, when lines blur, when love and self-respect force us to choose. If this story touched you, leave a comment, tell me what you think, or if you were been through something similar. Every share, every like, every time you hit subscribe does not help me to continue this journey. It helped carry the stories of grandparents who learned to say no a little farther. Thank you for walking the whole way with me.